What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Dragonknight tank. Still the most effective tank in the game in terms of overall class and overall group utility. GK tanks, while they are still, like I said, the strongest tanking class, other classes have slowly been creeping up on the DK tank. That being said, because DK tanks are still probably the best source of minor brutality as well as the engulfing flames debuff for instances where you have magic DPS, DKs are probably still going to remain at the top of the line when it comes to classes just because of those two buffs. Those are very powerful for overall DPS contribution, with the Stam DK and the Mag DK DPS numbers not looking nearly as hot as the best Magic and Stamina DPS. DK tanks are probably going to be here to stay at the very least for this patch. It remains to be seen whether they will be able to maintain their rank as top tank. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know. Basically recreate this build yourself. Now as a support role, you do need to have access to a lot of different skills and a lot of different sets. So we'll be going over each of those sets and skills that you're going to want to have on hand to kind of fit the situation. And these situations can vary depending on the fight strategies, the trials that you're running, whether you're on the main tank or the off tank. So bear with me while we explore all of these different options here that you're going to need to have on hand. Inventory management is definitely going to be a skill you're going to want to pick up here as a support role. And then because we're a support role, we don't have a DPS parse, so instead we'll be talking a little bit behind the sort of philosophy behind tanking. Not much has changed between Elsewhere and Scalebreaker, but I'll still kind of go over my philosophy behind tanking, what I look out for when I'm trying to judge new tanks for certain raid teams, and what I generally do in my own personal raids. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with gear. And this section is going to take a very long time to go through because of all the gear sets we have to kind of go over. So first, starting off with Monster Helm sets. There's a lot of Monster Helm sets that you can run here. Some of them selfish, some of them more group-oriented. Symphony of Blades, which I have here, is one of the more group-oriented sets. So this comes from Depths of Malatar, so you do need to have access to the Rat Stone DLC in order to get this set here. So when you heal an ally who's under 50% of their primary resource, you grant them Meridia's Favor, which restores 23-25 magic or stamina every second for 6 seconds. And this basically is based off of their highest maximum resource. So if they're magic DPS, it'll return magic. If they're stamina DPS, it'll return stamina. And it also does affect tanks and healers as well. This is an incredibly powerful source of resource sustain. One of the best in the game, actually. Now, running Symphony of Blades does mean that you're going to have to run some form of group heal, and you have plenty of options when it comes to potential group heals, and I'll go over them when we go over our skill sets. But there are plenty of other Monster Helm options that you can go for here. Real quick here. Moving over to Monster Helms here. We're just going to start from the top of the list here and then move our way down. So the first one here on our list is going to be, let's see here, it is going to be Earthgore. Earthgore is not a particularly strong set. This is definitely a selfish Monster Helm set, mainly because of the changes that took place a few patches ago that made it heal only one person in the AoE rather than all people within the AoE. So Earthgore is really great in situations where you need a selfish self-heal. A classic example of where I still use Earthgore today would be Cloud Rest hard mode, so Cloud Rest +3 when you're the portal tank. It just really helps out the additional self-ability because you do get that burst heal pretty much on demand. You're never going to get it when you don't need it, but it's a very selfish set, and I would not necessarily recommend farming for it unless you think you'll need it in something like Asylum +2 or Cloud Rest +3. Moving on from there, we have Lord Warden, which is a classic tank set. This is a really great both selfish and group utility set here. This comes from Imperial City Prison, so a very old set at this point. It dates back all the way back to the Imperial City DLC. The one piece gives you spell and physical resistance, so like I said, selfish, but the two piece, whenever you take damage, you have a 50% chance to summon a Shadow Orb for 10 seconds, which increases the physical and spell resistance of you and everybody within 8 meters of you by 3870. So this is not only selfish because you get a lot of additional resistances, but it's also group oriented because it also provides people within 8 meters of you that additional resistance as well. So in trash packs where you're pretty much right in the middle of the trash, or in boss fights, in stack and burn fights particularly, where everybody's pretty much stacked right up against the boss's butt, this gives the DPS a little bit more survivability, a little bit more peace of mind, so they can continue to do their highest damage that they can without necessarily worrying about healing or taking too much damage and getting one shot. Really powerful set here, so I would definitely recommend picking this up. Bloodspawn is probably the only Monster Helm set that I would recommend picking up, like full Monster Helm set I'd recommend picking up if you only have access to the base game sets here. So this one, whenever you take damage, you have a 6% chance to generate 14 ultimate and increase your physical and spell resistance by 6450 for 6 seconds. You're not really going to be using this for the physical and spell resistance because it's just such a little chance to proc that you're not going to get it consistently. But the additional ultimate generation that you get is the main reason why Bloodspawn is so powerful. So you get a lot of additional ultimate every 6 seconds. So that's really, really strong, really, really nice overall to get more Warhorns. So the faster you're able to get your Warhorn up, the faster you'll be able to get your major force back up, which gives you more DPS bonuses. So that's where Bloodspawn really shines. So it is more of a group-oriented set with a little bit of a selfish component behind it, but you're really using it more for the group component rather than the selfish component. Moving on, we have Thurvokun, which is a more group-oriented set here. So whenever you take damage, you summon a pool of Desecrated Bile for 8 seconds, which inflicts damage and Minor Maim and Minor Defile. So this is not quite as useful on DK tank compared to some other classes because DKs do have a source of an AoE Minor Maim. But if you want to basically replace that ability with a Monster Helm set, Thurvokun is a great set to use. The basically acts as a free Minor Maim, and it's really powerful in trash pulls with a lot of dangerous trash, with things like Maw of Akaviri, for example, Hall of Fabrication, Sunspire trash. Thurvokun is really great to have in one of the tanks. Combine this with something like Lord Warden, and your DPS have a pretty good amount of mitigation there, both from debuffs and buffs. Moving on, we have Vykosa, which is a selfish set here, but it also has a little bit of a group orientation behind it. So when you bash an enemy that you've taunted, you frighten them with a deafening howl, applying major maim to them for 3 seconds, lowering their damage done by 30%. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So this comes from Moonhunter Keep, so you do need to have access to Wolf Hunter DLC in order to grab this set here. But the major maim, this is one of the few sources of major maim pretty much on command that you can get. There are other sources of major maim, so for example Solar Prison under the Templar line there does also apply major maim, but that is an ultimate. This is a set effect, so you're able to basically apply major maim when it counts the most as well. So for example, a great place to use this, or to kind of showcase where you use this, is if you're progressing Sunspire hard mode on bosses like Yolnahkriin or Navintas. When they do their Fire Breath, you can just bash them with Vykosa, and your Fire Breath, for the duration of that Fire Breath, you're taking 30% less damage. So really great overall. You can also use this in conjunction with more AoE effects as well. So for example, on St. Olm's in the Asylum trial, if you use Vykosa as he's shooting out his fireballs in Execute, those fireballs are affected by major maim. So that basically reduces the damage that your DPS will take from those fireballs. So kind of a group orientation focus behind it as well. Next we have Stonekeeper, which is definitely a selfish set here. So when you block an attack, you gain an energy charge stack up to 1 stack per second. When you gain 6 charges, you release the energy, restoring 5350 stamina and magicka, and also healing for 5350, but I have some CP, so it's jumped up to 6398 here. After releasing the charges, you cannot regain new charges for 14 seconds. Basically gives it a 20-second cooldown. So again, a more selfish-oriented set here. Doesn't give you quite as much of a heal compared to Earthgore, but it does give you stamina and magicka back, so if you are hurting for sustain, Stonekeeper is not a bad set if you're just kind of working on sustain. You will definitely want to move out of Stonekeeper if the situation permits it to a more group-oriented set later on, but for kind of selfish learning how to tank things, Stonekeeper is not a bad option here. This does come from Frostbolt, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC to grab this set. Grundwolf is another kind of decent set. It's definitely more selfish for tanks, but the proc condition, which is critical damage, it's not really high on a tank. Tanks, generally speaking, will not have higher than like 21% spell or weapon crit, and it has to be on critical damage. It can't be a critical heal, so not that great, but you can still pick it up if you'd like. It does give you a little bit of additional sustain here, but in my opinion, Stonekeeper is better off if you want that additional sustain there. So those are all your must-have sets. Now let's go over our tanking options here. So we have pretty much two different sets that you can rare here. So you have your body set and you have a front bar set. Tanks, generally speaking, will be able to wear one of those sets on both bars, so it doesn't really matter which one you go for. The only set that I would not recommend having as your weapon set would be Ebon, and that's because of a bug that happens, well, not really a bug, it's more of a nature of the way that bar swapping works. So Ebon, real fast, because I do have this on here, this comes from Crypt of Hearts, so you can farm this just as a base game set here. It increases the max health by 1,000 for you and up to 11 group members within 28 meters of you. So this is actually a pretty strong boost overall to your max health. A little bit of a nerf compared to where it was in Elsewhere. So in Elsewhere it was 1118, so a little bit of a nerf here, but it's still pretty useful because once you include all your modifiers, your max health bonus actually jumps up by a decent amount. A little bit less than about 1.5k, I believe. It's probably closer to about 1.3, 1.4k at this point due to the nerf. So that basically allows your DPS to focus a little bit less into health and a little bit more into just raw damage. So that is one of the benefits of running Ebon Armory here. But moving on from Ebon Armory, we have Yolnahkriin. Yolnahkriin is a set that comes from Sunspire, and this is one of the sets that's going to be a little situational because the proc condition is going to be on a taunt. So let me just pull it up here because I believe it is covered a little bit right now. So you do need to taunt an enemy in order to give people the minor courage. So if you're an off tank and you're not necessarily taunting the main boss, or you're just taunting ads, Yolnahkriin probably isn't going to be the right set for you to run. So generally speaking, this set will be placed on a tank that is taunting the main boss here. But it is the only source of minor courage currently in the game, so this is a set that you're going to want to hold on to as a tank. Now, in terms of why you shouldn't run Ebon as your weapon sets, the reason for that is the system, when you do your bar swap, you are momentarily have no weapon equipped. And so what happens is you lose that 5-piece on the Ebon because it doesn't recognize that you have any weapons equipped. So you lose the 4 and the 5-piece, and then when you finish the bar swap after that, about 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds of that bar swap, it then recognizes that you have the 5-piece set effect, and then you regain that 1,000 additional max health. On a tank, it doesn't really matter too much, but on a DPS, it's noticeable because you will see that dip in that 1.4k max health, and if they're at full health, they lose that max health, and then they regain it when you do the bar swap, and then they have the heals back up to full. So that's why you want to run Ebon weapons, but any other set that I'm going to mention here in a moment, you can wear them as weapon sets. We're just going to go ahead right on down the line and just go over each of these different sets here. Starting off with dungeon sets. Starting off with, whoops, where are my heavy dungeon sets here? So let's just go sort by dungeons. Under heavy dungeon sets, there are a handful that are pretty good to pick up here. First one here is going to be, let me see if I can find it, Leeching Plate, which is really great in trash pulls. This basically, whenever you take damage, you have a chance to basically summon a pool of poison on whatever damaged you, which deals a certain amount of poison damage and heals you for that poison damage. So really awesome in trash pulls where you just want to stay alive. But other than that, not really useful overall. Beyond that though, Jailor's Tenacity is another selfish set. So when you do 7,000 or more health from a single attack, you gain range vitality for 5 seconds. Good example of where you want to run Jailor's Tenacity would be places like Cloud Rest or Asylum as the main tank if you need that additional healing received bonus from major vitality. So for example, Cloud Rest, where you're getting hit by Baneful Mark, it's really helpful there. But other than that, Jailor's Tenacity is a little bit of a niche use case here, and definitely more of a selfish set. Beyond that, you also have Dragon's Defilement, which is a new set from Lair of Marsalok, so whenever you take damage from a melee attack, it has to be melee attack, you gain a Corrupting Aura that applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach to all enemies near you. This is really great for trash pulls, but if you have a Templar healer that's running Power of the Light, it's a little bit redundant, and you don't really need to run Dragon's Defilement. But this is a set that I would probably say consider picking up for trash pulls for that AoE Minor Fracture and Minor Breach. But beyond that, that's pretty much it. If you want a really selfish set, then you can run Renald's Resolve, which is kind of a little bit of a weaker version of Jailor's Tenacity. So whenever you deal direct damage, you gain a stack of Resolve for 10 seconds. Each stack increases your healing taken by 1% and your spell and physical resistance by 420. You can have up to 8 stacks of Resolve. So do keep in mind that the stacks of resolve, that physical spell resistance, does stack with major ward and minor ward, major resolve, minor resolve. So you do get a lot of additional spell resistance, plus you get that 8% additional healing taken bonus, which does stack with minor vitality and major vitality. So really great selfish set, but beyond that doesn't provide any sort of group utility. And this comes from the new Dungeon Moongrave Fane. Moving on from there, there are a few medium and light armor sets that you want to pick up from dungeons. One of the medium armor set, the one that you're going to want to pick up here, find it, it's going to be Hircine's Veneer. This is really great for stamina heavy groups, or groups with stamina DPS. It reduces the cost of stamina abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members. So because it's a medium armor set, you are going to want to run this as jewelry and weapons, just because medium armor tanking, while it has been more viable in the past, now than it has been in the past, still not ideal. So you do want to try to get jewelry and weapons for Hircine's Veneer. The Magicka version of this would be, if I can find it, is going to be Worm Raiment. So this reduces the cost of magic abilities by 4% rather than stamina abilities here. Really great for magic heavy groups, but if you don't have any magic DPS, not going to be very powerful here. Very similar to Hircine's, it's a light armor set. Light armor tanking is definitely not something you want to necessarily do, so definitely want to pick this up as jewelry or weapons. Moving on from dungeon sets, I believe next is a couple of trial sets here. In terms of trial sets, not many of them are particularly great. A lot of them are more selfish. The only one that I would probably say maybe would be good to hold on to might be Gallon Wave, in case they decide to buff it later on, but really none of the heavy trial sets other than Yolnahkriin is really worth farming for. A lot of them are based around sort of, survivability, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you do want to be a little bit more selfish, but in general there are better sets to pick up if you're just going for straight survivability than heavy trial sets. In terms of overland sets here, there are quite a few overland sets to pick up, starting off with our heavy overland sets. We have Plague Doctor, which is the ultimate when it comes to selfish sets here. Gives you 3,000 additional max health, so really selfish, really packs on the additional health there for additional survivability. Moving on from Plague Doctor, you do have Akaviri Dragonguard, which reduces the cost of your ultimates by 15%, giving you quicker Warhorns. Less time between Warhorn casts gives you better major force uptime for some more DPS. Not particularly powerful, but still better than nothing, and it is a heavy armor set, so you can wear this on body as well. Moving on from there, Livewire is actually pretty decent to apply concussion, which is a prerequisite for off balance and trash pulls, but very similar to things like Leeching Plate and Dragon's Defilement. This is a strictly trash armor set that you want to hold on to. You're not really going to be using this for bosses. This is definitely more of an AoE trash sort of set here. Now, in terms of medium armor sets here, there are a handful of medium armor overland sets to pick up that do fit fairly decently well as a tank. First one is going to be Hide of the Werewolf. Whenever you take damage, you generate 5 ultimate. So, kind of fitting in line with sort of Akaviri Dragonguard. Faster ultimates means more major force uptime. It's medium armor set, so you do want to have jewelry and weapons. But this is actually a fairly weak set overall compared to some of the other sets that we've already went over. And then in terms of light overland sets, there is one set that I do want to point out here, which is actually pretty decent. We scroll all the way back up here, try to find it. And here it is, Martial Knowledge. So Martial Knowledge has been updated for Scalebreaker to be more of a debuff sort of group utility set. So while your stamina is below 50%, your light attacks cause the enemy to take 8% additional damage for 5 seconds. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds. This basically gives it a 5% effective uptime. So this is a little bit tricky because some people are saying this is better on healers. Other people say, well, why not make the tank use it? I'm more of the line that this set should be put on healers, but I do see a rationale for putting it on tanks here. The one thing I will point out about Wave Martial Knowledge is that the armor bonuses themselves are not really that great. You have max magicka and 2 spell damage enchants. Not that great. It'll give you a little bit stronger heals, but that's pretty much it, and you're really more depending on your healer for heals rather than your own self heals, particularly because for Dragonknight, your main heal, Green Dragon Blood, scales off of max health rather than spell damage and max magicka. So I don't really like Martial Knowledge for the armor bonuses, but the prog condition of keeping your stamina below 50% is a little bit not something I want to do. As a tank, stamina is basically your lifeblood. It dictates how much you can block, dictates how much you can bash things. And stamina is basically what you drive off of as a tank. And you don't really want to maintain it under 50% like that. The other thing too is you're probably using tri-stat potions, which gives you back stamina, and your stamina pools are generally speaking going to be fairly low. They're not, I mean, they're going to be lower than stamina DPS, higher than healers generally speaking. But one tri potion, depending on your race, could easily pop you above the 50% threshold, and then you have to work your way back down to below 50%. So I personally don't like martial knowledge, but I do recognize that some people might see this as a pretty decent tanking set. It's a light armor set too, so you do need to have jewelry and weapons if you want to run this set here. And that's pretty much it for all of the gear options. Oh, no, there is actually one more set that I just remembered here. It is a light armor set here as a dungeon set, and it is, let me see if I can find it real fast. Sanctuary. So this increases the healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. Same limitations apply here as it does to healers. The radius is very small, and overall healing received bonuses are not great in most trials. It's a very niche set. You'd be using it primarily in places like Cloud Rest to kind of combat the Baneful Mark and Execute, and potentially the Custody's Hard Mode to help heal people through ice prisons if you're able to be within that range. Most tanks are not going to be within 10 meters of ice prisons, so kind of doesn't really fit there. Moving on from all of our sets, so that's pretty much all the sets. Now let's go ahead and talk about gear traits, enchants, and all that good stuff. So there's a couple of different schools of thoughts when it comes to tanking. One of the schools of thoughts is run all sturdy pieces across all of your armor pieces. That's one very viable option here. This reduces the cost of your blocking to a really decent amount. The other option, which is what I personally prescribe to, is running infused on my large pieces and sturdy on all of my small pieces here. The reason for that is, across both schools of thought, you're running prismatics on your large pieces, and depending on whether you want to spend the extra money, either prismatics on your small pieces as well, or you're running more kind of health, stamina, or magicka enchants on your small pieces to kind of fine-tune your resource pools. So, getting infused on your large pieces just makes your prismatic enchants a little bit stronger, which gives you a little bit more resources. But like I said, running all sturdy is also a very viable option as well. In terms of jewelry enchants, you have quite a few options when it comes to the actual trait you want to run. I personally really like having one harmony for the additional strength to my synergies, especially the resource returns from shards. But it's kind of up to you if you want to run harmony. Overall, it's not necessarily going to make or break you, but there are people who prefer other traits. One of the strongest traits for tanks, though, is going to be Triune. Just basically acts as a prismatic enchant, giving you health, stamina, and magicka. You can also use any of the 3 base game traits, so arcane, robust, or healthy, depending on sort of what resource pool you need. And you can also just run infused for stronger enchant strength as well. So for enchants, I pretty much stick with shield plate enchants. You can also run magicka regen glyphs if you'd like, if you want some more magicka regen, and you feel like your block cost reduction is decent enough that you don't necessarily need to run cost block shield plate enchants. So if you want additional magicka regen, you can certainly run magicka regen glyphs instead, but typically speaking, you will definitely want to have at the very least 2 shield plate enchants here. Shields also count as a large armor piece, so they also fall under the either sturdy or infused with a prismatic enchants. For my shield, at the very least, I prefer sturdy. Now, for your weapons, I have a decisive trait, and that's really because one-handed traits really are garbage. So this is kind of making the best out of the worst situation here. Just gives you a little bit more ultimate so you can get faster Warhorns. It actually doesn't contribute that much, but it's better than nothing. Like I said, you're making the best out of a bad situation here. In terms of enchants for your front bar, it doesn't really matter which enchant you go for. So for example, I have just the base restore health enchant here. Restore, absorb stamina, absorb magicka, weakening. Your one-handed glyph is going to be half as strong as the advertised amount on the glyph itself, so it doesn't really matter all too much. You can also run certain alchemical poisons as well, for example minor fracture or minor breach poisons to help with those debuff uptimes if you'd like. Kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. For our backbar, you have a few options when it comes to backbar. Frost and lightning staves are probably the 2 most common, next to just double barring sword and board. You can also use a bow backbar, though that's more for kind of advanced users where you want to do a little bit more off DPS as well with things like Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage now. I personally like Frost Staves just because it gives me some additional damage mitigation with my Destruction Staff passives. You also have the option of blocking with Magicka. Most tanks don't decide to take that passive, but you can certainly do so if you prefer. In terms of your backbar staff, though, regardless if it's Frost, Lightning Staff, or if you're even running a bow, definitely want to have Infused, and your enchant's going to change depending on whether you're running Crusher or your healer's running Crusher. You could also be running something like Weakening instead, but definitely, usually I've seen Crusher enchant on the backbar with, obviously, Infused to make it a little bit stronger. So that's pretty much it for all of our gear stuff. Moving on to our character sheets. I am a Nord. Nords are going to be one of the better options when it comes to races for tanks, but races for tanks, generally speaking, do not really offer too much. So the tanks, doesn't really matter what race you are. You can be whatever race you'd like. The best races for tanks, generally speaking, are considered to be Nords, Imperials, and Argonians, generally speaking, in that order. Nords for the health and stamina, they get the additional resistance, and they get some additional ultimate whenever they take damage. Imperials get the health and stamina, they get the 3% cost reduction to all abilities, and they get some additional resources back whenever they deal damage. And Argonians, they get Magicka and health, but the real reason why Argonians are potentially a good option for tanks is that whenever you drink a potion, you get, I believe, it's 4,000 Magicka's health and stamina back across the board, so that's just helpful for overall sustain. But again, race doesn't have quite as much of an impact on tanking effectiveness as it does on, for example, healers or DPS. So you can really pick whichever race you want as a tank. For attributes, this is going to vary depending on race. So for example, for those guys who watch my streams who know that I tank on a Dark Elf, you'll notice that my attribute distribution is very different from what I have here. Because Dark Elves don't get additional max health bonuses, I need to invest more points into health, because I get the max stamina, max magicka, I can invest less into stamina and magicka. So for example, here as a Nord, I have 20 health, 20 stamina, and 24 magicka. The general rule of thumb is for health, try to hit around 35k health as kind of that minimum threshold. You have a lot of different gear set combinations to kind of work through, so just keep in mind that just because you have 37, 38k health with one setup, doesn't necessarily mean you will have 37 or 38k on a different setup. Just keep that in mind there. And then for your max magicka, max stamina, try to get at least 20k. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I try to go for. This is obviously before things like Warhorn buffs. So definitely kind of what you want to shoot for there. 35 for health and around 20 for magicka and stamina. In terms of Mundustone, we're still going with the Atronach for additional magicka regen. A lot of our buff does use magicka, so we want to make sure we have good magicka sustain here with the Atronach. For food, there is a new food that's going to be coming out, and it's called the Witch Sugar Skulls. It's not out yet, but it gives you health, stamina, and magicka, and health regen. This should be coming with the new, with the upcoming Witches Festival, which is coming up in October, so in about 2 months or so. For right now, though, you'll be sticking with the general purple base game max tri-stat food. But once Bewitched Sugar Skulls come out, you will want to swap over to this food here, assuming they haven't changed it between now and when Witches Festival goes live. And then, we are a vampire. You don't have to be a vampire. So currently, my tank is not a vampire, and I'm doing very well with it. Vampirism gives you the additional 10% magic regen and stamina regen if you are stage 2. The downside is you are taking 15% more fire damage. At stage 3, you get additional access to a passive that reduces the amount of damage you take when you're at low health. Usually, generally speaking, going to be under 50% health. The downside is at stage 3, you take 20% more fire damage, and your health regen on both stage 2 and stage 3 also goes down. So it's kind of up to you if you want to be a vampire or not. There are some fights where the additional fire damage is actually noticeable, particularly, for example, in Sunspire, where you have to face off against Yolnahkriin and Navintas, which do deal fire damage with their fire breath, as well as their flame spit, particularly from Navintas. So those instances, you might want to reduce your vampirism down to stage 1, because now you don't have any negative effects, but at the same time you don't get any positive effects. Or you can just not be a vampire. It's kind of up to you how you want to play with that. Moving on to our skills. On our front bar here, this is the Swordboard bar, we have Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Fragmented Shield, Green Dragon Blood, Engulfing Flames, and Reviving Barrier. This Engulfing Flames, if you have Stamina DPS and no Magic DPS, is a flex spot here, but if you have Magic DPS, try to keep Engulfing Flames on if you can for the additional 10% more damage from flame damage. On our back bar here, we have Inner Rage, Balance. The niche next 3 abilities are kind of flex spots here. Unrelenting Grip, Choking Talons, and Unstable Wall of Frost. You can also go with Elemental Blockade instead if you prefer. Then you have aggressive Warhorn. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you have a lot of skills you want to hold on to as a tank. So just going down, right on down the list here. For a self-heal slash a group heal, you can run Cauterize, which is personally not the best option, at least from my opinion. It only heals once every 5 seconds, and it lasts 15 seconds, so you're only really getting 4 heals out of it. The initial heal, 10 second, 5 second, and when it runs out. Not particularly great either when it comes to healing. It's a 36-86 heal. Not particularly strong, but it is an option if you want to go with it. Under the Draconic Power line, we typically will use Balance for our Major Ward Major Resolve. So we get our Magicka in exchange for health. Not that big of a deal because we do have a dedicated healer usually, or 2 healers. Kind of just keeping an eye on our health, obviously, as a tank. So you don't necessarily need to run Balance. So if you decide not to run Balance, you can run Volatile Armor instead for the Major Ward and Major Resolve here. Protective Scale, I left it unmorphed because you can really choose whichever morph you'd like. If you want Dragonfire Scale for some more damage done, or you can run Protective Plate for the Snare and Immobilization immunity. Kind of up to you which one you want to go for here. This is going to be very useful where you're taking a lot of damage from projectiles. So a good example of this would be Black Rose Prison. Very, very helpful in Black Rose Prison to reduce the damage you're taking from those projectiles from those bosses. Deep Breath is an ability you want to have on hand. This is sort of an AoE interrupt. It does have an 8-meter radius, so it's not going to be able to interrupt something way across the map here. But it is nice to have on hand, just in case you need to interrupt multiple things and they're all within that 8-meter radius. Under the Earth and Heart line, I highly recommend trying to fit in Cinderstorm if you can. It's a pretty strong heal. It lasts for quite a while, 18 seconds, and it heals for 1164 over 1 second. This is my personal favorite when it comes to finding a way to give out a group heal to help proc Symphony blades outside of running energy orbs. I do want to mention here under Pierce Armor that you can go with the other morph, which is Ransack. So you get minor protection if you run Ransack. There are other ways to get minor protection, circular protection, and also running the Sigil Order ultimate and having that slotted there. But if you don't have access to those 2 skills, or you don't want to run those 2 skills, then you can run Ransack instead of Pierce Armor. You will lose the Major Breach, but you should be getting that from Elemental Drain from your healers already, so that's not that much of a sacrifice there. Moving on from there, under the Destruction Staff line, you can also pick up Crushing Shock as a ranged interrupt, which is really helpful in certain situations. Not necessarily necessary, though, to have on hand. If you're running a bow backbar, you're going to want to run Air Barrage / Endless Hail just to help proc your enchants. Under the Heavy Armor line, Immovable or Unstoppable Brute are actually pretty strong this patch. You do end up reducing your movement speed, so a little bit of a sacrifice there, but it does grant you immunity to knockback and disabling effects. At the very least, Unstoppable Brute does. Actually, both of them do. It does give you Major Ward Major Resolve. This is another source of Major Ward Major Resolve if you don't want to run Volatile Armor. But Immovable is really great because it basically gives you a lot of additional blocking mitigation, which is pretty strong overall. That being said, if you're running 7 Heavy Armor to get the full effect, you will end up reducing your movement speed by 100%, basically meaning you can only move by roll dodging. So just keep that in mind if you decide to go with Immovable here. Under the Vampire line, Invigorating Drain is an ability that you might want to run. There are certain fights where, as one of the tanks, you might just need to generate a lot of ultimate, so Invigorating Drain is the best way to generate a lot of ultimate. Under the guilds lines, we have the Fighters Guild. Ring of Preservation is great for the minor protection as well as the heal. It only lasts for 8 seconds, so just keep that in mind. So you will need to put this down fairly often if you're using this consistently as a source of damage reduction. But it does also have a really small heal. For every second, in this case, it'd be healing 862, which is not terrible. Keep in mind that Cinderstorm is 1186, I believe, with this particular build. So not as strong as that, but it does also provide that minor protection as well, so that kind of offsets that there. Under the Mages Guild line, I don't think there's anything else here. On the Sigil Order line, you can also run Deep Thoughts in combination with something like Immovable or Volatile Armor to get your resources back. And when you're channeling Deep Thoughts, you cannot block, but if you have access to the Deliberation passive, you also get Major Protection, which reduces damage taken by 30%. So you do get some mitigation if you max out Sigil Order and you use Deep Thoughts, but it's not going to be as much as just blocking, and you block casting Balance and what's it called, Fragmented Shield. You can also run Temporal Guard. This is the Sigil Order ability that has minor protection as your passive while you have it slotted on your front bar if you want minor protection just passively. Under the Anointed line, have all of these unlocked. So you have Overflowing Altar for lifesteal and the Blood Feast synergy, Shadow Soak for the damage synergy, not quite as strong as it used to be, but still pretty decent. Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy for the shield and the Major Vitality. It's mostly used for the Major Vitality, less so for the shield. And Energy Orb, which is really great because you can cast it once, and that's all you need to cast it on. It gives everybody the chance to get that synergy for some more resources, and you get the heal off for any sort of like Symphony of Blades healing or Earthgore healing that you might need to proc. Really powerful skill now for tanks. Now that you can only cast it just once, really good sustain bonus here. In the Alliance Warline, Echoing Vigor is good as another kind of form of group healing. And on the support line, Efficient Purge for any sort of purges that you might need to get rid of. So that is pretty much it for all the skill options here. Moving on to our champion points. So we have 810 is our max CP, which gives us 270 points across each of our different constellation types. Starting with green CPs, we have 75 Arcanist, 49 Tenacity. Gives us 66 into Shadow Ward, 40 into Tumbling, and 40 into Warlord there. Nice, even, balanced approach hitting all of our jump points, but you can shift your CP points around accordingly. So, for example, you can push Arcanist all the way up to 100 if you'd like, and give up the 25 points elsewhere. Generally speaking, though, you definitely want to have, at the very least, I'd say 61 or 66 points in Shadow Ward here. Higher if you can, but it's kind of up to you if you want to go even higher. Under the blue CPs, you need to have 100 Blessed to increase your healing done, to the max, 81 Elfborn, 81 Precise Strikes, and 8 into Piercing. So this will give you 24% critical healing done whenever you do Stamina or Magicka heals. And some abilities will scale off of whatever is higher. So for example, Green Dragonblood will scale off of whichever is higher. So for example, in this build, we do have higher weapon crit, so that's why we have Precise Strikes. So the chance to crit with Green Dragonblood will be dependent on our weapon crit chance because that's higher, so it'll scale off of Precise Strikes instead. So that's why we have 81-81 across Elfborn and Precise Strikes. For our red CPs, this is going to be a balanced approach here. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, that is all the build information. So now we can quickly talk about the philosophy behind tanking. Nothing much has changed too much for tanks between Elsewhere and Scalebreaker compared to things like DPS, which has pretty much shifted to a dot meta, and healers, where big changes to energy orbs and healing springs have kind of changed their sort of playstyle as well. Tanks, on the other hand, you guys didn't really see too much of a change. So the key mechanic here for tanks is you have a couple of priorities. First priority is obviously stay alive. If you are dead, you're not tanking anything. Second thing is to maintain taunt. If you're not taunting anything, you're also not a tank. From there, once you have mastered those two things, maintaining taunt and staying alive, which might take some work depending on the fight, how comfortable you are with certain things, then you want to move into mastering debuff and buff uptimes. This is what separates good tanks from great tanks. Tanks that can maintain really good buffs and debuff uptimes. Those are things like Minor Courage from Yolnahkriin, but also debuffs like Engulfing Flames, if you're running a Crusher enchant, how well you can keep up your Crusher enchant, things like that. But the most important thing is definitely to stay alive and maintain taunt. So if you need to start off running more selfish sets, then go ahead and do so. Don't really focus on group utility until you have mastered being able to stay alive. It doesn't really do you much good if you're dropping every time the warrior does his channeled strikes. So definitely work on staying alive first, and then working on your debuff and buff uptimes. So in terms of overall sustain for tanks, what I like to do is, use balance in order to get my Magicka back, and then run Fragmented Shield to get my stamina back. Try to heavy attack where you can. This is going to be a little bit of a learning process, learning when you can heavy attack certain bosses, but heavy attacking is definitely the best way to maintain your overall stamina. You also can learn which attacks you can block, which attacks you don't need to block. Definitely want to block every heavy attack. Some heavy attacks can be dodged, so also consider dodging rather than blocking if you can. That way you avoid taking any damage at all. So for example, you can dodge roll Ohms' normal attacks to completely avoid damage entirely. That being said, dodge rolling does take up stamina, so you do want to kind of balance that out as well, because stamina is also used for blocking. So just keep that in mind if you want to dodge roll attacks and things like that. But beyond that, a lot of it is just sort of maintaining overall buffs and debuffs and obviously staying alive. So Engulfing Flames is an important debuff to have if you have magic DPS. Things like Shadow Silk are certainly good to kind of maintain. But beyond that, it's really difficult for me to describe tanking in general playstyle without actually showing you guys how to tank. The good thing is there are a lot of streams, old streams that I have where I'm a tank, because I am a main tank. I should say I'm a tank main, I should say, and I really enjoy tanking. So definitely check out all those various streams. Well, a lot of the Mayflower streams right now are Sunspire, so you're going to see a lot of Sunspire kind of POVs, as well as Cloudrest from Hellfire Dominion. But if you guys go further and further down into the past, you will see some new, some different trials there. And tanking playstyle has not really changed too much over the various patches here. You get a couple of new sets, new toys to play around with, but generally speaking, the overall playstyle is still the same. It's really focused in on just maintaining good debuff and buff up times. So that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions about tanking or the build in general, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.